start the session here. So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the fourth session of our eight-part AI webinar series for nonprofits. Yeah. I'm Aarti Chauhan from NASCOM Foundation in NGO Empowerment Vertical, and I am delighted to have all of you join us for today's session. So, at NASCOM Foundation, through our NGO Empowerment Vertical, we work towards strengthening the digital capacity of nonprofits by enabling access to technology, knowledge, and capacity building opportunities that help organizations create greater social impact. As part of this webinar series, our goal is to simplify artificial intelligence for the social sector and help nonprofits not only understand how AI can improve efficiency and decision making, but also how it can be adopted reasonably and meaningfully. In our previous session, we have learned how nonprofit can access Gemini and discover its feature, and will also identify how and had also identified how we can scale up the impact. Today, in our fourth session on prompting 101 with Gemini, we will learn about effective prompting and identify prompts through feedback or active co-authoring with Gemini. We truly hope this series becomes an interactive learning journey where all of us can explore, learn, and grow together. Now, I would like to welcome Jed, speaker for the today's session. Welcome, Jed. Over to you.
Thanks, Artie, and hello, everyone. I'm very excited and thankful to have you guys again here. I'm going to share my screen real quick so we can kick things off. Here we go. So welcome to halfway point. Essentially, we are at fourth out of 8 sessions. And what I would say, it's kind of like the turning point of the series, mostly because we've spent the past 3 sessions more about creating mental scaffolding about AI, very conceptual, very theoretical. Let's get rid of that now. Let's be a bit more hands-on, a bit more practical, and I want you guys to be as engaged because moving forward from this session onwards, we're actually going to play around with Gemini a lot. Now, I want to highlight while we are using or talking about Gemini as our practical context, all of these uh, sessions are equally as applicable to other platforms, particularly this one, because prompting is essentially kind of like a new life skill, right? Similar to how they positioned code before, this is probably a more accessible, yet even more critical skill that we need to develop moving forward. So let's kick things off. So as you know, I represent an organization called TechSoup. We're a nonprofit just like you, longtime partner of NASCOM, and I'm Jed, senior manager, a real person. I'm just gonna breeze through these introductions because it's the fourth time we've done this, right? Uh, Naturally, as well, the content was developed together with the team, NASCOM, as well as Info Exchange, our partner, as part of the APAC AI learning community. You'll get a ton more resources from that community, so please sign up for free. Now, what do we want to achieve today? We want things to be a bit more practical. Essentially, uh, I'm pretty sure you've already done or maybe encountered content about prompting outside of this session. You already have some foundational skills. That being said, this isn't new. What our intention today is really let's just revisit, strengthen your foundations on it. And most importantly, for those more seasoned users, I want you to hopefully pick up a few best practices along the way. We'll do that by me introducing a foolproof, what we refer to as a prompt formula. Not mathematical at any point. Don't worry. We call it a formula because really you're just almost like doing a form. Most importantly, outside of prompting, we also want to understand how do we interact with the output. We'll also explore ways you can refine your output moving forward and other factors that impact it. Thinking models, maybe we can even explore platforms later on if we have time, and so on. So all of this, the intention really is how do you communicate with Gen AI, such as Gemini, and how do you take that output and make something out of it, improve it, refine it in a way that you're co-authoring with Gemini. So moving forward, let's kick things off. Now let's quickly recap again what is AI, because this is going to be very critical as we move forward. First and foremost, again, AI is a branch of technology where it mimics human intelligence. It does so by mimicking three key mental activities: learning, reasoning, and inferring, right? Now, the way AI does that is it sees reality in patterns. If you give it a set of numbers, it will see eventually a sequence there. If you give it a picture, it will see rather than patterns, or sorry, rather than numbers, it will see a sequence of pixels. Now, because of its ability to see patterns in content that otherwise doesn't present patterns up front, it's also able to use that understanding of patterns and use it as the basis to mimic reality or, in a way, create new content. Essentially, that's what I'm trying to say. If you give it a sequence of, say, text that you've written, it will see the pattern of language that you have, your communication patterns, and it will apply that to create new content as if it's you. In a way, that's that. But despite all of these capabilities of AI, we're all typically struggling with the same question, particularly when I was reflecting about this, particularly during my early stages of, learning. It's this: why am I not getting the best output? A very good example is we often hear, oh, that email sounds super AI. Now, that being said, that's what we want to address. How do we get the best output, regardless of how we define best? That being said, as you kind of like reflect on why are your outputs underwhelming, it's always important to include yourself in that equation. And I want to ask this question: how often do we factor how we actually communicated with Gemini or Gen AI? Because often we would see, oh, maybe I didn't give it enough resources, maybe the links are broken to my sources or whatnot. But we never always factor ourselves as well. Now, we are equally as a variable there because at the end of the day, we're the ones writing that prompts. We're the ones evaluating that output, right? So before we actually deep dive on best practices, maybe let's align on where we are with prompting. And I'm going to open my chat here because I would like you to actually interact with me through chat throughout the session. Now, I want you to think of this, and you can respond through chat. Imagine you need to find a peaceful cafe. It's busy in the office, it's distracting, you need to write a report. So you need a peaceful cafe where you can get, like me and Artie, a cup of coffee, decent internet, hopefully not too distracting. You need options. Now, that is the context. I'll give you a couple of minutes. Could you write in the chat, how would you approach Gemini for recommendations? How would that prompt look like? So I'll give you 1 or 2 minutes. I'll wait for your responses. Now, RDDA, you are not exempt here. So I would like to see your prompts as well, guys. So I'll wait for your prompts and we'll take it from there. But I'll also write one of mine. I think before I would do this, I would have prompts something like this before: Wi-Fi, coffee under $2. And also, if I'm too lazy, I would even add nearby, something like that. How about you folks? For those with access to the chat, could you let me know? Could you type in the chat? How would you write that prompt if you're looking for a cafe nearby? Find a cafe with high speed internet. That's great. So just peaceful cafe nearby office. A little reasonable. Okay, perfect. This one is a bit more detailed. Find me, whoops, within radius of 5 kilometers. That's great. Hi, please help me find a cafe seat quietly. I love how you still include niceties. I do too. Like, actually, please, thank you. I still do that. Google doesn't like it because sometimes I have prompts that just says thank you. Actually costs them money to process that thank you. Anyway, so now this one is a good one, Amit. So South Delhi, where I can work quiet for 3 to 4 hours. But now this is a really good one. Now, essentially, we all have different patterns of communication, different ways of packaging information. And that's the critical thing that we need to evaluate moving forward. Because our outputs are really the reflection of how well did we package that information, right? So for me, oops, sorry, it would often be any of these. And I think some of the chat options actually reflected this as well. What are cafes? What are cafes that are open near me with Wi-Fi? Best affordable cafes near me, cafe nearby, Wi-Fi cheap, quiet, similar to a Google search, and hope to God Gemini understands where I'm coming from. Things like that, right? Now, more often than not, this is actually pretty useful. We would get some feedback, we would get some outputs, one or two would be useful, but not really often the best. Now, that's what we want to evaluate moving forward, right? Essentially, it's worth remembering that Gen AI is guessing. It sees reality in patterns, data patterns. That being said, it's really just guessing what is the output that you want, how do you want it packaged, and so on. And it's guessing based on contextual information. Majority of it is coming from you by way of your prompts. So it's really relying on you to spoon feed it information. And because of how we've been used to writing these prompts, or not even prompts, how we've been used to querying technology. I'll give you a good example. I'm a 90s kid. I went through the SMS boom, chats, YMs, Google. We've been so accustomed to writing things with so much brevity because that was the culture. Now, unfortunately, now with AI, it's actually counterintuitive to do that because AI runs through information, lives with data. So brevity sometimes isn't the most effective strategy to communicate with it. That being said, it's also worth highlighting that we often forget that we have tendencies to expect Gen AI to be able to read between the lines. And most importantly, we forget how valuable that is. In fact, if you go through medium.com, they actually shared a list of 10 common mistakes we would often commit when we're prompting. But really, you can summarize it into two: the details you've included and how do we react, or sorry, details you've included or forgotten, and how do you react to the initial output? Because all of those is data to Gen AI, and it doesn't remove the guessing component, but it reduces that guessing component. So let's now revisit. I've seen really good prompts here. So let's now revisit how do we then improve that kind of output or that kind of prompt. So for example, let's use this. What are cafes that are open near me with Wi-Fi? For example, near me. One of you shared a very good feedback here within a certain driving radius, 5 kilometers, right? That's a that's a great component to include because reducing the guessing component. You're creating clear criteria for Gemini to operate within. So near is, say, driving radius of, as the example earlier, 5 kilometers. Now, second sample here, affordable. What do we consider as affordable? We are all coming from different budgets here, right? What's affordable for you folks might not be for me, and vice versa, right? So maybe what is your accepted price range? Much like what I said earlier, or at least in my sample, like 2 to 3 US dollars, something like that per coffee. Now, finally, here, my typical way of prompting before, cafe nearby, Wi-Fi, cheap, quiet. Well, good luck. Yeah, it's not a lot to go on there. So let's skip that and now start moving forward, right? So it's important to remember that with Gen AI prompts, it's not really similar to Google AI searches. With Google, yeah, we can express with a lot of brevity because our intention is to get as many resources as possible, to get as many references as possible. But with Gen AI, what we often forget is we have a subconscious expectation of what we want to see and how we want to see it. That's why the activity of engaging with Gemini is innately biased. You're working with your biases, so you have to keep that in check. That being said, though, because we're working with subconscious expectations, we have to give Gemini as much information to be able to get as close to that expectation as possible. So let's now revisit how we want to improve this prompt. Okay, but before we do, let's skip to Gemini. Let's run one of those earlier prompts and see what we get. From there, we'll come back to this deck and try to refine it. And let's see if it does improve. Okay, so I'm going to skip here to my Gemini here. Now, I've pre-run all of these prompts earlier, so let's open my history. So let's find the cafe, not the refined one. So here. So as you can see, I tried it. Cafe nearby, cheap Wi-Fi, quiet. By the grace of God, I got something out of it. Now, mind you, I am based in Quezon City, so that's what it's referring to here in QC, Quezon City in the Philippines. It did give me logical lists here. It's quiet, serene, chill, camp. So as you can see, it gave me a price range as well. Now, all in all, it gave me a few notes as well, what the vibe is, uh, perks, and so on. Now, all in all, it's a good option. It's a good list. Is it necessary? Does it necessarily meet my expectations? Well, it may not necessarily resonate with you, but for example, these two cafes that they gave me aren't actually very nearby. This is easily a 20-minute drive from my place. So not nearby if I'm on a rush. That being said, now most importantly, after this one in Tomas Morato, that's even farther. So does it actually meet my concept of nearby? Not really. So I've already lost time just getting this kind of like getting these initial outputs. So how do we refine that? So let's go back now to my deck. Now, what we want to do is, as the saying goes, the devil is in the details. So you want to package as much detail as possible. So how do we refine this horrible, horrible prompt of mine into something that is more, reasonable for Gen AI? For example, let's first define specifically what is the task you need help with. Now, this is running on an assumption that Gemini is smart enough to understand me. Thankfully, it did. But one of the key things you want to be very clear with is if you're, say, searching for something, which is predominantly some of the most common activities we do with Gen AI, you want to be very clear. What do you want with that search? Do you want the best option, like just one option? Do you want a list? Do you want it in a table, and so on? Define exactly what is it that you want and how do you want it packaged to you. Second, are there any arbitrary concepts? Nearby, cheap, quiet, and so on. You need to be able to give Gemini a framework of how does it determine that so that you're kind of like an even playing field and you build some level of shared understanding of how to determine what it is that actually meets your criteria. Uh, Most importantly, if it's a multi-step process, maybe break it down into steps. Now, this may not necessarily be the most applicable for, say, something as simple as finding a cafe, but if, say, you're assessing a spreadsheet of donors, that becomes a bit more complex. If you're creating, say, outreach content, that also is a bit more complex. And finally, clarify how do you want that output package to you. Is it a table, a list, a one-pager, a bulleted list, and so on? So how do we then revisit this prompt? Well, let's break it down. First, here is what it would look like if it's better written or better packaged for Gemini. For example, please provide me with 3 to 5 cafe options in Delhi. That in of itself, we've already created a bit of structure. I only need 3 to 5 options, nothing more, nothing less. I've already specified the specific area where I'm coming from. Now, I'm not familiar with the vicinity, so I just looked into NASCOM's office and started there. That being said, okay, what is a 5 to 10 minute drive from South Darjeeling Enclave, which is, I think, where your Delhi office is, if I'm not mistaken already? Okay, perfect. See a nod. Now, as you can see here, I'm already introducing some alternatives as well, or some basic process in the prompt. Now, if it's not accessible within a 5 to 10 minute drive, maybe consider something accessible through public transportation. Now, from there, we're going to create some ranking. After that, confirm through publicly accessible information if the cafe has Wi-Fi available. As you can see, that's already in of itself arbitrary. The presence of Wi-Fi may not necessarily be, available in, say, the website or in social media pages. So maybe look through other information such as reviews and whatnot and put it in the list. Additionally, we've created a strict price range, $2 to $5 per person. That's my budget. And most importantly, what is the best? The best way to do it, maybe use something as simple as this. Say a 3.5 rating in Google. Very easy, right? We've already created a tangible criteria for it to follow. Now, How do I want that package to me? I wanted it in a bulleted list with all of these information. Now, how does that look like and how does it compare with my original list, right? Now, barring the different locality where those prompts were based, because mine was in the Philippines, let's see how well that information was packaged. As you can see here, they gave me a neat table, they gave me some options, but the options itself wasn't the best. Now let's see what it looks like when it was refined. When it was refined, it looked something like this. So immediately, I have these cafes. I know the Wi-Fi availability. I can see it's confirmed. The description is a fantastic workspace, freshly roasted specialty coffee. So it's already packaged for me the information that I need. And I can't confirm whether these are good options. So I'm going to rely on RT and DA here to confirm whether these are really good cafe. Okay, see a thumbs up. Perfect. So as you can see, it immediately improved my output in a way that when we say improved, it panders to what I was looking for. I think that's the key thing here. Eventually, you need to just determine what the best is really depends on what you're looking for, right? And we're able to do that by packaging enough information. Now, we keep talking about coffee. How does coffee really resonate with a nonprofit? We're going to get there. But before that, if you were to say, look for your own coffee shops, what would be the other considerations that you would factor in? So I'm going to wait for give you a couple moments over the chat. What would be other considerations that are worth including in that prompt? And how would you define that? How would you write that as a part of your prompt in Gemini? I'll give you a minute or two before we move forward. Parking option. Ah, that's a very good one. Parking. Yes. How would you have Gemini assess parking availability? I don't know the answer, by the way. I mean, I'm just kind of like raising that question if you have ideas and how you want to phrase that for Gemini. That's a really good one, though. I've thought of 5 to 10 minute drive. I've not considered parking. That would be, yeah. I could easily spend, it might be a 5 minute drive, but I might easily spend the next 20 minutes finding a parking slot. So that is a good factor. Low foot, okay, there's a good one. Footfall for the time frame that I would be working from the cafe. That's a very good one. So give you one more second before we move forward. Now, really, as we move forward, I know this sounds kind of like too basic, but what I'm trying quite to do, there you go, how quiet or serene the place is. But going back to my point here, I know this looks far too basic, but the idea here is we're trying to break our typical behavioral patterns of, again, prioritizing brevity. The idea is you want to be spoon feeding Gemini this information. That's why I'm making you reflect on all of these basic criteria and how you would want to phrase that. So moving forward, now we've been talking about the cafes for about the past 20 minutes here. How does this exactly resonate with a nonprofit? Well, we've done essentially a search. A search is something we would often do, maybe finding, say, documentation from other publications to support our grant work. Maybe one other thing is finding funding opportunities. Again, another form of search, right? That being said, let's now apply whatever we've learned from that, or how we prioritize information and package that up into this other situation. So consider your organization, right? You're looking for funding opportunities that is specific to your mission. Now, you need to submit a list of funding opportunities to your board so you can evaluate what you can prioritize on. We're nonprofits. As much as we want to apply for as many funding opportunities as possible, that's really not realistic, right? We need to prioritize and be efficient. That being said, before you write the prompt, before you write the actual prompt, what would be the considerations that you would want to factor when you're looking for funding opportunities. And if you're going to eventually turn that into a prompt. So I'll give you a sample. Now I'm going to wait for your uh, feedback as well over chat, but here's a good sample. For funding opportunities, maybe I would say eligibility is a criteria that we want to consider, right? For example, I'm going to type here, only consider opportunities available to, say, India-based nonprofits, because it might package up a list for me, but if all of those opportunities are only available for, say, European or African nonprofits, then what's the point, right? Outside of, say, country of origin or country of establishment, if you're looking for funding opportunities, what other factors or considerations would you want to include in that prompt? I'll wait for your chat feedback here. It's almost that I'm using this chat kind of like as an excuse to sip coffee, but no, really, I'm trying to keep it as engaged as possible. So please give me your feedback. What are the other considerations you would factor? Open from your mail, give your website. There you go. Specifically, write your needs. Funder categories. That's a very good one. Funder categories. One other thing you may want to factor, are you prioritizing, say, government grants versus private, opportunities from, say, private entities? That's another one. Thematic issues. There you go. That's a very, very good one. It immediately kind of like creates a particular scope. I just want to circle back to the other feedback there. Give your website. I think that's very good. And we'll actually circle back to that later on. A list of active funding sources, grants. There's a very good one. So you're essentially creating scope, right? So let's move forward. Essentially, these are already all reflected in your chats, but your mission and background, that's a very, very good criteria to include. Contextual information, such as, okay, what kinds of grants resonate with your goals? What are your priorities? What are your capabilities even? If they previously funded similar orgs, that's a very good one, by the way, Marissa. How to find individual philanthropic? Yes, that's another one. And also format. So essentially, you want to include all of these considerations. Here are some of the kind of like sample considerations that you want to factor. Now, I understand that a lot of this is often always, how do I remember all of this information, right? Because again, it is very counterintuitive to how we would often look for information. Now, this is where we would want to introduce you to a formula. Whenever you're prompting, particularly for more comprehensive requests like this, one easy way to remember, one easy formula to follow in order to kind of like remind you that you're packaging all of this important information for Gemini is to always remember these 4 letters, P, T, F, and C. P is first persona. Who's asking? Is it try to determine your role or Gemini's role in that process? For example, in this case, in a fundraising case, maybe it's not necessarily the persona, but maybe your mission. That is the persona that Gemini wants to consider. Say, pretend I am, say, an animal rights organization. That in of itself will create enough scope for Gemini. Now, the next is T and F is task and format. They kind of go hand in hand. Task is exactly much like what we did earlier. Define exactly what do you want Gemini to do. Do you want it to give you a list? Do you want it to give you just one? Do you want it to write you a summary and so on? And format, how do you want it packaged back to you? Do you want a bulleted list? Do you want a table? Do you want an infographic, a video, and so on? And finally, this is something we often forget, but is very important, context. I would always repeat, the devil is in the details. Context can mean a lot of things. Contextual information about you, for example, maybe much like in the chat earlier, give it your website. That's a great way of building context. At least it now understands, okay, what exactly do you do? Where are you based? And so on. Other things, other context notes is go. Maybe, okay, give me funding opportunities in the past, say, 6 months only, nothing further than that. Now, really what you're trying to do here is you're using this formula to help create a clear scope and also create clear direction for Gemini. We say formula, but again, no part of this is mathematical. It's really just imagine you're filling out a form. Now, that being said, let's now apply that formula one step at a time. Let's try building that prompt. And I would invite you to open, say, a Word doc or even Gemini and try to kind of like develop your own together with me, right? The context is you're looking for funding opportunities. So for persona, for example, say this, I represent TechSoup, an international nonprofit that delivers technology resources and capacity building. I'm already highlighting our mission for nonprofits across the globe. This way, I establish who I am, what is my mission, what are my roles, and so on. Task and format, we are looking for open funding opportunities that align with our core mission. Now, I'm being very specific. Please list only 3 to 5 opportunities. Summarize them in a bulleted list, which includes a link so I can double check it, and a description to why it is a reasonable opportunity for me to pursue. In context, now I'm going to create additional scope here. Say our priorities are primarily in Asia and Africa, in AI education for nonprofits. So let's be very specific and include that. Now, enough about this. Let's hop to Gemini and let's take a look at what it provides me, okay? Let's go back here. So I've already pre-run that because sometimes this often takes a while. So where is that? Grounded prompt, proposal draft. Okay, I forgot. Oh, here, AI funding for nonprofits. As you can see, I've already also included our year in review just to give it a bit more context. As you can see, that is our prompt earlier. And this is what it came up with. Now, these are actual legitimate grants. So if any of you wants to take a screenshot and maybe revisit it later on, by all means do so. So as you can see, there's a F5 STEM and AI education grants right here. Why is it suitable? This grant prioritizes organizations serving communities across Asia and Africa, is unrestricted, so on. Google, although I'm pretty sure this was closed already. Granted AI, so here you go, Canada's International Development Center. And as you can see, just like that, we're no longer scouring, I don't know, pages and pages of grants from, say, EU or whatnot. We immediately got something a bit more tailored for us, right? So let's go back. So for your organization, what would a similar prompt look like? Outside of what I included, say the mission and also say geographical focus, what would be the other considerations you would identify? And I think I saw some really good recommendations here. For example, maybe naming previous funders you worked with and do they have other opportunities open? Because that's a very good criteria. You're already making it a lot easier for you to make that engagement, right? Are there other considerations you will factor in? So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes before we move forward. And also, for those of you who were able to write a full version of that prompt within the past 1 minute after I shared that sample, right? Maybe you're more than welcome to share your prompt in chat as well. I'll give you a minute before we proceed. I'm going through the chat as well. It's pretty interesting notes you've shared here. I like list of active funding sources, grants, and CSR. If you have that list, that would be effective in also really tailoring or getting more effective outputs. That's a very good one to provide the list. So yeah, so one very good feedback here is provide a list of active funding sources, grants, and CSR. Now that actually kind of like segues us to the next slide because, whoops, keeps going back. Sorry about that. Outside of your prompt and the prompt formula, there are other ways that you can actually get the best outputs out there. And providing a list, or much like what I did earlier, providing, say, our year in review as an attachment, is one way of actually making or getting better outputs. Now, you may be asking, well, Jed, what does that exactly do? Well, here's the thing. If you provide it with lists or other reference files, you're following the process of a process called grounding. Grounding is essentially, okay, take this document, take this reference, and work within the confines of this. Or, say, for more creative output, follow this as your thematic like point of inspiration. Like try to replicate this. So that's called grounding. When you add references, you're grounding your prompt to within a specific scenario or context. And that's one way to do it, providing references, lists, and so on. Other thing that we'll try to explore is exploring thinking models. Remember, Gemini has three: Flash, Thinking, and Professional. We'll see whether that actually impacts the output. In some cases, it does. I've done a session with Copilot where it was actually more apparent if you use different thinking models. And finally, and here I'm not, let's be very honest, we're not only strictly just using Gemini, right? If you're not sure with your prompt, run it in another platform or have other platforms check your prompt, right? There are other methods of improving your output. Now, let's try to revisit that funding opportunity with what we now know, right? Outside of a formula, we can also ground it. We can also explore thinking models and even explore, say, using other platforms. And we'll try that later if we have time. Essentially, say you found an actual grant opportunity that you want to apply for. You're interested, but you're challenged with coming up with a pitch, which is not, unusual for us, right? Now we need to explore how we can use grounding and also other thinking models to arrive at different drafts, right? Now let's give that a try. Now to do this, before that, I want to share with you that I've prepared some sample like fictional documents. For example, this RFP, this request for proposals for this is completely fictional, all right? So don't ask me for money for this. This I made this up yesterday. So we've created a fictional request for proposal. It's by Origin, a fictional company. The idea is AI for Impact Grant Initiative. This is the FAQ page. And essentially, okay, there are two funding tiers and so on. So what we want to do now is we want to explore whether there's a difference in the pitch that we can generate if we don't use grounding and when we use grounding. So let's go back to my prompt here. Now, what we wanted to do is let's now find the proposal. Now, let's first look at the non-grounded proposal. So what I did for the non-grounded proposal, sorry, let's go back up. Sorry about that. Let's expand this. So I explained who TechSoup is. The task, okay, kindly develop a draft proposal for a TechSoup that achieves the following. And these are really just copy and paste from the RFP, from the sample RFP. Now, it's non-grounded. What we did was we didn't really give it information about TechSoup. As you can see here, no part of this points to a website. There are no attachments. And essentially, I just copied and pasted certain sections of the request for proposal to fill out my prompt. Now, what did we get? We got this. Say, okay, organizational profile, TechSoup Global. We are a United States based organization. This is our mission, project proposal, and proposed AI solution, and so on. So we're creating internal framework. So we're using Gemini for, say, grant writing, translation, content localization, automated impact reporting. So that's essentially our proposal. And here is our budget, and so on. Now, it's hard to assess with just this. Initially, well, looks good. Looks great as a first draft. But maybe we can do something better. Now, let's explore what it would look like, what that output would look like if we completely grounded it. To compare, I've created a separate chat, so there are no contextual information, right? There are two separate chat windows. And what we did was we started adding a few more items to that prompt. So I'm going to close this. let's go quickly up. I'm just going to show you my prompt. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. As you can see, it's exactly the same prompt, but rather than copying and pasting components of the RFP, what we did was we pointed it and grounded the prompt to to these additional documents. What I've added was the the RFP itself, that document, that FAQ for the proposal, a sample application template, and also our year-end review. So what does that look like now, right? How it changed my prompt was that, I'm just really pointing it to that direction. So for example, for the format, hey, could you make sure that you're reviewing the RFP itself to make sure that we're fully kind of like above board and eligible? And most importantly, could you really familiarize yourself with what we do? Here is the year-end review, right? Here's what we do, here's what our strengths are, and so on. Now, immediately you'll see the difference. Because here, hey team, I've thoroughly reviewed the Origin AI. So there you go. Yeah, strategy. Here's the important difference. This wasn't included in the non-grounded prompt, which is to effectively pursue this funding, we should position this application through one of our localized regional partners. Because one of the key things that is part of that RFP, and I'll show you right here, is the eligibility. Where's the hangout? So we need to be based in Southeast Asia and East Asia. But then again, you could have included that as part of the prompt. So yes, that's one key thing. But here's another thing. Because we grounded it and included some sample applications, and it already immediately created something. So I'm going to scroll at the bottom here to give you a better view of it. So here, it immediately packaged it following the format of the application proposal. Here is the draft, you can see here. And just to show you, here is what that proposal template looks like. Oh, sorry, that's the actual feedback. The template is here, which I asked Gemini to create as well, actually. So in a way, now this is a very minor kind of like glancing effect, but really through grounding, you're creating better reference points for Gemini, and you're really educating it. Okay, this is how I want it packaged. These are additional contextual information, right? Immediately, it changed the output, or at least the quality of output. Here. Now, let's just go back really quickly as we're approaching time. So does the thinking model also impact it? I've tested this, not necessarily, no. I would say test thinking models for more analytical responses, but at least for something creating new content. Unfortunately, I ran out of time to prepare a proper sample, but for this, not necessarily, no. But let's move forward. So refining output, now we've got outputs. Are we stuck there? No, there are a lot of other things you can do. What you saw I used earlier was a feature called Canvas. Canvas is a built-in feature of Gemini, which creates a co-authoring space between you and Gemini. So you don't have to copy and paste information anymore to, say, Google Docs. You can immediately edit it without leaving Gemini and continue to leverage Gemini as part of your writing companion. Now, how is that different from using, say, copying and pasting it over a Google Doc? There is one critical factor there. If you're not on a business or enterprise plan, Gemini will not work natively within Google Docs. You'll be restricted to your Gemini chat. That being said, this is your workaround towards that. You can continue collaborating with Gemini, not in Google Docs, that's fine, but you can still do so within the Gemini chat app. Now, I'll show you what that looks like again. As you can see here, I've had it open with Canvas, created a canvas for me. And when I open it, it becomes an immediately editable document right here, test, test, test. As you can see, I can now work directly without having to leave Gemini. Now, what are the other things that I can do here? First and foremost, Gemini has quick access options right here. Change length, change tone, and also suggest edits. For example, This one too long. Let's make it shorter, very short, and it will spot tailor or spot edit that particular section you've highlighted. Let's give that a moment. I should have, let me just change to Flash to make this faster. Didn't necessarily make it faster, didn't it? So, all right. While we're waiting for that to load, one thing you want to understand is you're co-authoring with Gemini here, but you're strictly co-authoring with just Gemini. You cannot immediately co-author with other people because this is a private feature for you. If you want to co-author with other colleagues, you would need to actually eventually have to export this to Google Docs. Now, are there other ways you can collaborate or co-author with Gemini? Here is something I learned about 10 minutes ago, and legitimately, I only noticed this earlier. I'm going to close this. Outside of sharing things through, say, through Canvas, you can actually share your full chats, similar to, say, creating a project in ChatGPT. But project is more of an open context window. This is more you sharing your chat so another person can continue it. So a little less collaborative, but again, one way to work around. So as you can see here, we have a ton of pinned chats right here. For example, you want somebody else to process your output. Now, for example, let's go back to one of these cafes. From here, you see these three buttons. You can share it via Drive. What it does is that it takes this entire chat, chucks it into your Drive, and it becomes an editable, or sorry, a shareable chat. What does that look like? If I go to my Drive here, it becomes this. It becomes a file in of itself. So you can naturally share that. And what I did was I actually shared it to my personal account right here. Actually, let's copy that again so you can see. Let's share it. Anyone with the link, copy link. Now let's open my other browser right here. So we are at my personal account. As you can see, the upgrade is glaring there. Let's paste the link. And just like that, I can continue this chat that my other colleague started. So this is great in terms of knowledge sharing and also say, hey, okay, this might be useful and I don't want to package it up anymore for you. I'll just share the entire chat so you understand the full context. Now, whatever chats I continue here will be private to me. It will not reflect to the source chat. So that's one way of collaborating. So just going back again, let's just go back to Canvas. You don't have to be limited to just your to just the immediate output. You can continue co-authoring that. And by the way, if you lost those canvases, you can just head on to library and open it there. As you can see, I have the document here. Let's open that. So from here, you can continue your editing. And outside of the quick actions right here, you can also ask Gemini, for example, to be a bit more specific. For example, here, say, could you include some data from reputable third parties about the state AI adoption among nonprofits to build my use case. Sorry, to build my my case, for example. So you can now provide specific feedback like that, and Gemini will incorporate those changes directly to your immediate output. So again, it's not just about the one-shot prompt. It's also about improving or learning how to refine outputs from more active features like Canvas. Now, let's just wait for that to reflect. So let's wait for that to generate. There you go. So 84% operates on budget. Okay. Let's try it. And I think it has. So 1,100 members. Okay, There you go. So just like that, here, I can see now the reports. So as you can see, just like that, we've incorporated what would have been massive changes if we had to reach out to a colleague as quickly and as effectively as that. And again, without having to leave Gemini, and you're immediately improving outputs without having to, fully iterate through chats and feedback. Now, to wrap things up, because I know we're approaching time. Oh, one other thing, Canvas isn't exclusive to Gemini, by the way. There are equivalent functions in ChatGPT. It's also called Canvas. If you're using Copilot, it's called Pages, edit in Pages. One interesting thing, because we have a series in Copilot, you can actually co-author within Pages. So if you share that with another Microsoft 365 user, you can co-author in real time, unlike in Gemini and ChatGPT, where it's really just between you and your Gen AI platform. So outside of that, naturally, again, similar to what we've all used to, there's no harm in also just sharing feedback and iterating, give feedback over the chat, thumbs up, thumbs down. That also helps refine Gemini in the long run. But if you want to be a bit more hands-on, a bit more specific and tailored, and also have that option to go back to previous versions, Canvas is probably the most efficient way you can do it. And it doesn't even need a paid license. You could be in a free plan, free personal plan. Canvas is still there. It's a great function. Very underrated, I would say. Now, one last thing as we wrap up. Do not stop at the first output. That's my key feedback. Prompting is a great way to get to the best first draft as possible. It's not the final submission, all right? And my general rule, supplement, not substitute. Gen AI is here to streamline and also kind of automate some of your work, but treat it as more of a companion rather than a complete substitute for colleagues or labor, right? So Gen AI is great. One of the key challenges with it is riddled with inconsistencies. It's a piece of software, but without software guarantees. Now, I'm not gonna take some other person used that line. I'm not gonna take ownership of it. I took it from a consultant I've worked with before, really amazing experts. So no software guarantees from AI because it is moody, just like people. Funny enough. So one way to at least reduce kind of like that variability is clearly phrase your tasks, and that will go a long way. And I hope the prompt formula, grounding, and also your ability to refine outputs would help you get to that best first draft as consistently and as effectively as possible. Now, that is it for prompting. If you want to continue this, we don't have to just keep it within these webinars. We have 10 hours of free mentoring through the APAC AI learning community. Please scan this QR code and join us. Outside of the mentoring, there are assessments, there are tailored learning paths, all for free. Please join us. We're happy to continue your learning, maybe privately through the mentoring. So I'm going to stop there. We have about 7 minutes for Q&A. I'm going to open it for questions, feedback.
Thank you, Jed, for showing us lovely way to prompting. So we definitely wanna incorporate these in our daily operations, activities, and maybe personally, right? So yeah, open floor for the questions here. Anyone want to ask any questions? You can put it in a chat box, and maybe you can raise your hands and ask directly how to use Copilot.
Love that. So we are running a Copilot series. I'll share a link to Artie so she can include it to the. It's also 100% free, so feel free to join it. We're at the third of 5 sessions there, by the way. So unfortunately, there's a bit of catching up, but we have a series for it. Do you ask Gemini to fact check or source check the info it gives? That's a good one, but I don't ask it to actually do that activity. Rather, I ask it to package information for me so I can do it myself. That's a very good one. So rather than fact check everything, I would naturally have parts of my prompt that says, okay, only use data from reputable sources. If available for me, I would even include an exclusion list, not from, say, Reddit, Facebook, things like that. In terms of fact checking, I would rather just have it, okay, for me to verify your information, put links in superscript so that I can, review your output, things like that. So yes, in a way, but not directly. So I hope that helps, Marissa. How do we prompt Gemini to brainstorm fresh social media ideas when we feel stuck? I love that. I absolutely love that. So here's the thing. We'll actually visit that idea on the Gems session, which is the 6th session. We have one more in between. Now, if you feel like you need a brainstormer, what would often be helpful for me is not through a prompt, but rather through transforming a prompt into a gem. A gem is really a reusable prompt. What I would do is I would create a gem. And when you say create a gem, it's really just writing and saving a prompt, not technical at all, but more persona driven. So I will give it, okay, here is my, for example, for social media, here is our branding guidelines. Here is the content I would want to promote. For example, it's a blog. Could you give me 3 social media caption options? Or if not that, for example, you're stuck in terms of you don't know what to promote. Maybe you could ground it to, okay, here is a list of information or content I've published recently. Here are my, say, if you have available to you, say, your marketing goals, you can use that as well. So give me ideas that I haven't fully explored yet, things like that. So sometimes I saw Gemini AI also giving bias information. Yes, 100% yes. So thank you for flagging that, Vijaya. But I want to highlight, though, it's not exclusive to Gemini. Uh, all Gen AI have their own biases. And that's because, again, it really lives in data. Sometimes our data is incomplete. Sometimes it may be skewed. That's why it creates bias. But the biggest bias of it all is being very pandering to you. So be mindful of that, right? It's meant to be very agreeable with you. So that's the biggest bias that you have to flag. So outside of you fact checking or sanity checking Gemini, it also helps to get checked by other people. So we do that a lot here as well. One last, what are the best method for prompting in case of financial data? Also privacy of the data. That's a very good one. There are a couple of ways you want to approach that. If you're dealing with data, my recommendation is first you want to test how well that prompt is working. For that, I would normally create sample data, have Gemini create mock data so I can at least test how well I could assume that prompt to work. Outside of that, anonymize your data as well. Any personally identifiable information, names, addresses, remove those. Maybe you can replace it with, say, member numbers. That wouldn't make sense for anybody. And you can easily randomize that anyway. So anonymize your information. Most importantly, make sure you're using a professional account. Professional accounts, such as, in Gemini, that includes the donated nonprofit plan. It doesn't necessarily need to be paid. These professional accounts are protected by enterprise grade security, which means any information you share with it through prompts, grounded information or references, it sticks within your organization. It's not used to train models that are publicly used elsewhere. That being said, anonymize your data, test with mock data, and most importantly, use, if possible, a professional account. So you're leveraging your enterprise grade privacy and security. So I hope that helps. We have 1 more minute left. I'm open for one last question if there's somebody up for it.
Yes. Yeah. We can take live question also if anybody is interested. They can unmute and ask question or use the chat box option.
Any would do.
Yes.
If you are sharing an image, what should you do to keep privacy? That's a good one. Images, I'm not a big fan of sharing images of myself or other people. Honestly, that's just my personal rule. Because you really can't, even though you say you're enterprise grade security, there's just something about me that I that's a no-go for me personally. If you can avoid it, avoid it. So, but if not, the only rule I would say is that I know there are ethical guidelines about publishing or even creating AI images of children. So that being said, if you're going to use images, try to use stock photos. That's one, if possible. The other is if you need AI to create images of people, try not to have them, particularly children, maybe avoid having them generated. You can write that as a guardrail in your prompt or have them look away or not fully visible. But if you can avoid it. If you can just generate something synthetic, that would be great. To analyze which one, great. I'm not sure I'm following that question, but feel free to. I have my email here. I think we can continue that conversation. You can contact me there. Uh, but I guess we are now 1 minute over time. Now, just to kind of like set the scene, we've learned prompting. The next session in a few weeks' time is about multimodal capacities. So it's not just about generating images, spreadsheets, and whatnot. That's the tip of it. What I want to focus in the next session is how does Gemini process that if it's part of your grounding. If you say you sent it an image, say I sent you an image of my feedback form, how will you process that? So that's what we want to test in the next session. We just needed this as a foundation for that so we know how to properly package those instructions. Ah, okay, so that really is just if you need to prompt to pick images, it's really as simple as just being very clear with your criteria. Similar to when we did that cafe example, right? Be clear with your criteria, be as much as possible very concrete and structured with it, and that should work. A very good example is, okay, here are 5 sample images. If you have a branding guideline, you can include that as a grounded prompt. And you can also specify other things such as, for example, make sure it's effectively scalable to this dimension. It doesn't break any ethical guidelines or privacy issues and so on. So really just being a bit more clear with your criteria. That being said, IoT, I think I'm going to pass the mic to you because I know we are 2 minutes over time.
Sure, Jen, no problem. I think the participants can share their questions to me. I can pass it to Jed if at all is necessary requirement is there. But I will see you all there on 30th, the next session. And thank you so much, Jed, for for this insightful session here. Lovely to see you here, and I think yeah. Have a nice day, all of you. Thank you so much, Jed. Thank you, all of you. Thanks, Dia.
Thanks, everyone. See you in a few weeks.
Yes. Bye.